Sounds. They're everywhere. Practically everything produces them, most living organisms perceive them. But how is sound generated, transmitted, and processed by our ears? I'm Bruce Kirkpatrick, and today I'll be discussing the physics and mechanisms of sound generation and perception. In a little while, I'll examine these concepts as they relate to three very different instruments, but for now, we'll focus on the basics. When we say something has produced a sound, it has vibrated, like the drumhead and the cymbal we just saw. The vibrations from the object propagate as longitudinal pressure waves through the fluid medium until they come into contact with another barrier, like our eardrums. For the purposes of this video, we'll be talking about air as the fluid medium. When a wave moves longitudinally, as opposed to transversely, it means that the medium moves back and forth, parallel to the direction of wave propagation. A transverse wave, like an earthquake, moves perpendicular to the direction of wave propagation. We can plot a sound wave just like a sine wave. In fact, we can model sound waves with trigonometric functions. As a sound wave propagates, it creates minute density changes in the air that we call the sound pressure, which we can visualize here as the change from the horizontal line, which is ambient pressure. This change is called the amplitude, and we can further visualize this change with the black and white continuum above the wave plot. Here, we see darker colors in regions of higher pressure, 50% gray at ambient pressure, and white in regions of low pressure. We can visualize sound in a few other ways. One is with a Schlieren flow visualization, which uses a light source, parabolic mirrors, a barrier, and a camera to see density changes in the air. This technique is often used to demonstrate heat radiation, but we'll use it to take a look at what happens to the air around your hands when you clap. We can see the longitudinal waves propagate through the medium as the hands come together. The kinetic energy from the moving hands is converted to pressure waves that we see radiating out as the test subject claps. This is how sound is generated and transmitted through the air. When our ears perceive a sound, the pressure waves that we just saw traveling through the air have made their way into the ear canal, where the tympanic membrane or eardrum is housed. As the pressure waves strike the eardrum, it vibrates. This causes the small bones in the ear to flex against one another, in turn producing waves in the fluid of the cochlea. This fluid motion is what we hear when something has made a sound. This is where things get interesting. Since all sound is comprised of the same density changes in the air, what makes this different than this? To understand the properties that make sounds unique from one another, let's discuss the fundamental characteristics of sound. We'll start with the wave plot from earlier to focus on three of the primary features of sound: pitch, loudness, and timbre. Pitch describes the frequency of the sound wave, which is how often wavelengths travel past a measuring device in a set amount of time. Shorter wavelengths result in more oscillations per unit time, which results in a higher frequency and a higher pitch. To clarify, let's take a look at an oscilloscope as we transition from a concert A in the staff to the A an octave higher. Did you see that? The frequency doubled from 440 Hz to 880. We can also tell that the number of wavelengths has doubled visually, since the number of visible wavelengths has doubled from 2 to 4. A neat way to visualize pitch changes is adding loose, free-flowing particles to a vibrating surface. When the surface resonates with different pitches, it develops different nodes and antinodes. A node is a stationary point on a waveform, and an antinode is a peak point on a waveform. This can make some interesting patterns at high enough frequencies. Where pitch is modeled with the wavelength of sound, loudness is represented by the amplitude of the waveform. Sound pressure and loudness are closely related, but sound pressure is the physical difference between the pressure of a sound wave and ambient pressure, while loudness is dependent on the measuring device, making it a subjective variable. We'll now see what happens to a concert A at 440 Hz when the loudness is increased. It's intuitive. Volume and loudness are equivalent. As the loudness increases, the sound gets louder. This leaves us with timbre, the most complex of the three characteristics. Timbre is the trickiest of the three properties because we can't visualize it in the waveform like we can pitch and loudness. Instead, we need to look at two other plots. the sound envelope, which shows the attack and decay of a sound, and a spectral analysis, which shows the prevalence of different frequencies or pitches included in a sound. In the example we'll see in a moment, the sound envelope is shown in gray and blue, while the spectral analysis is shown in pink and black. These plots are pretty intuitive as well. The attack and decay of different instruments appear as we would expect them to. The violin, which gets louder as our tester draws the bow across the string, has a sound envelope that widens with time. Conversely, the guitar, whose sound decays quickly after the string is plucked, has a sound envelope that narrows rapidly. The spectral analysis is difficult to interpret, but we can see that all of the instruments had sounds comprised of frequencies between 0 and 4,000 Hz, which makes sense since they were all playing the same note. To better understand the sound, spectrum, and sonogram plots, watch what happens as I whistle from a low pitch to a high pitch and increase volume as I go up. We see the sonogram plot increase as the frequency increases over time, and the spectrum plot shows the same data with a focus on the loudness of the pitch. The sound plot's amplitude grows as I get louder. Effectively, combining the sound and sonogram plots gives us the spectrum analysis. Now that we understand the mechanisms of sound generation, transmission, and perception, along with what makes sounds unique from one another, we'll examine how sound is generated in different ways, specifically on the trumpet, violin, and clarinet. That's James Morrison playing the opening fanfare at the 2000 Olympics in Sydney. He's an exceptional trumpet player, and the trumpet is an exceptional instrument. Few instruments can match the harmonic and dynamic ranges of the trumpet. Let's discuss how the trumpet functions. Remember that sound production requires a vibrating surface. In the case of the trumpet, the vibrating surface is the player's lips. To play the trumpet, you buzz your lips into the mouthpiece, which is a piece of metal shaped to direct the airflow into the trumpet. This is what my mouthpiece looks like. It has a relatively deep cup which feeds into a narrow conical section called the backbore. When the mouthpiece is inserted into the trumpet, it fits snugly into the main tube of the trumpet, which is called the lead pipe. This continues to the tuning slide, which can be adjusted to alter the pitch of the trumpet by making it shorter or longer. The tuning slide feeds into the valve block here. The valve block is composed of the 3 valves, each of which lead to a different length of tubing. The second valve leads to the shortest length of tubing, the first valve leads to the next longest length, and the third valve leads to the longest section of tubing. Pressing these valves while playing lowers the pitch, and the pitch can be further lowered by pressing the valves simultaneously. For example, while pressing the valves brings the pitch down, tightening your lips and increasing the speed of the airflow raises the pitch. We can see that in action here. We now understand the mechanism of the trumpet's sound production. Let's take a look at the analysis of the trumpet's waveform. I recorded myself playing a concert A, 440 Hz, as in the previous examples, on my trumpet. We'll take a look at those characteristics we discussed earlier, but first we'll hear the raw recording. Now we'll see what the waveform looks like. We can see that the trumpet has a strong attack and a relatively maintained sound envelope afterwards. We'll keep this in mind for when we analyze the other instruments. We'll move on to spectral analysis. We saw the same trend in the sound plot as we did in the other waveform visualization. Strong attack, maintained pitch afterwards. What we couldn't see in the waveform, however, we can visualize in the sonogram and spectrum plots. The sonogram and spectrum plots give us two ways to visualize the frequency distribution. The spectrum plot shows the frequencies as a density function where the total area under the curve sums to 1, while the sonogram shows the frequency distribution as time elapses. When we zoom out on the spectrum, we can see the actual distribution of frequencies and identify that most of the frequencies are localized around 440, 880, 1320, and 1760 Hz. This is because the note I played, an A at 440 Hz, has an overtone series on the trumpet in octaves, and octave frequencies are scalar multiples of one another. That is, the A an octave above A440 is A880, and so on. We can also see from the sonogram that the attack had a higher pitch density in the upper register than the sustained remainder of the note. Keeping the properties we've observed in mind, let's hear the raw recording one more time. Listen for the strong attack, the sustained body of the note, and the relative abundance of higher frequencies in the note at the beginning versus the end. Now, let's talk about the violin. This is Hilary Hahn, one of the best violinists alive today, playing Paganini's Caprice No. 24. The violin is well known for its use both as a solo instrument, as we see here, and an ensemble instrument in orchestras and chamber groups. This is an electric violin, but it has the same essential pieces as a normal violin, so I'll use this to demonstrate the function of the instrument. It has basically the same anatomy, starting from the top, the scroll, the peg box and tuning pegs, the neck and fingerboard, across which the strings are stretched, the body, the bridge, the tailpiece, the fine tuners, and the chin and shoulder rests. A regular violin has holes carved in the body, called the F-holes, here, but the electric violin does not. We play the strings of the violin with a bow, which has a tip, the hair, and the frog. The open strings, from lowest to highest, are G, D, A, and E. To raise the pitch, we depress the string with our finger, which makes it shorter. The vibrating surface in the case of the violin is the string, which is brought into motion by either plucking or drawing a bow. Now, we'll do the same waveform and spectral analysis as we did with the trumpet. First, we'll hear the raw recording. Now, let's see how the waveform looks. Just like in the other example we saw of the violin's waveform, our concert A at 440 Hz has a very weak attack, after which the sound envelope develops as the bow is drawn across the string and the loudness increases. Let's see the spectral analysis. We can see from the spectrum and sonogram plots that the violin has a much higher density of frequencies in the upper register, around 1320 Hz and 1760 Hz. We see these frequencies for the same reason we saw them on the trumpet. The overtone series of the violin is in octaves, and the violin has a shriller sound that includes proportionately more of the higher frequencies. From the sound plot, we can see the loudness grow with time, since the violin gets louder as the bow moves across the string. We'll listen to the violin sample one more time, thinking about the weak attack, gradual amplification, and abundance of higher frequencies in the sound. We'll compare all three instruments soon, but we need to discuss the clarinet first. The clarinetist here is Benny Goodman, an eminent figure in jazz from the 1930s and 40s. He sounds great playing over the classic Sing, Sing, Sing. Let's talk about how the clarinet works. The vibrating surface in the clarinet is the reed. We'll see a closer example in a minute. The reed is attached to the mouthpiece by the ligature. The mouthpiece attaches to the barrel, which attaches to the upper joint. The upper and lower joints fit together here and contain all the keys which lower the pitch as they're covered. The bell attaches at the bottom to amplify the sound. Here's what a scale sounds like without the bell. And with the bell. Now, we'll see what happens when a reed is placed in a wind tunnel to model the motion of the reed inside the mouthpiece as someone blows over it. Just like the lips on a trumpet mouthpiece and the string on a violin, the reed produces a tone as it vibrates. Where pressing valves on the trumpet and pushing on the string of the violin change the pitch, the body of the clarinet manipulates the frequency of the sound by varying the length of the instrument as keys are covered and uncovered. As with the other instruments, I recorded the control pitch on the clarinet. Here's the raw recording. Here's the waveform. And here's the spectral analysis. We can see from the sound plot that the clarinet has a steady loudness, and we can also see that the clarinet has many frequencies clustered around 1,320 Hz. Now that we have data from all three instruments, let's see if we can identify the features that make them unique from one another. We'll start with the waveforms. The trumpet had a strong attack and consistent body to the sound. The violin had a very weak attack and a sound that grew continuously over time, and the clarinet had a very consistent sound envelope start to finish. Now, the spectral analysis. The trumpet showed a relatively even distribution of frequencies at 440, 880, 1320, and 1760 Hz. The violin showed a much greater abundance of frequencies near 1760 Hz than the lower frequencies, and the clarinet showed an abundance of pitches at 1320 Hz. These differences in the sound envelopes and spectrums are what make the instruments, and all sounds, unique from one another in terms of what we hear. Since we can physically manipulate the characteristics of sound by playing different instruments, we can also digitally manipulate these characteristics. Recall the sounds of the three instruments from earlier. We heard James Morrison playing trumpet, Hilary Hahn playing violin, and Benny Goodman playing clarinet. I'm going to play 3 audio-only recordings of myself playing a control sequence of notes, B-flat, C, D, C, and B-flat. See if you can identify which recording corresponds to each of the 3 instruments we've studied. If you guessed that version A was the trumpet, version B was the violin, and version C was the clarinet, which was the same order we talked about them, then you're right. Now we'll look at the videos to see what was going on. I modified the trumpet to sound like a violin. The violin to sound like a clarinet. And the clarinet to sound like a trumpet. Different software can be used to take physical sound input and modify it as a digital instrument, which gives the user control over things like pitch, loudness, and timbre. This is actually an issue sometimes. Audio processing software like GarageBand has made it very easy for anyone to start making electronic music, which tends to be a very hands-off, isolated activity. There are many popular recording artists who exclusively sample the constituent parts of their music from other sources. As an example, listen to this wildly popular remix. and imagine a saxophonist playing it live. That was awfully repetitive, and the song is over 5 minutes long without my enhancements. This happens a lot in popular electronic music, but using an electronic device as a live instrument is just as valid a form of music as playing any other instrument. It's important not to forget that music is an amazingly human talent, one that can and should be enjoyed socially. Whether you're singing with your friends in the car,
you raise me up
attending a live performance, or rehearsing in a group. Be sure to appreciate the magic of music. Concepts as abstract as pressure waves vibrating your tympanic membranes translates into something intuitive when you make sound and music. And, when you listen to a recording, don't trust your ears, because the characteristics of sound are easily manipulated, and hearing isn't always believing.